At this point, I am going to hand it over to Marcella Movitt, and we will get started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the next webinar in CALPRO's Adult Education Research Webinar Series. This series is part of CALPRO's Research-Based Practices Initiative. The goal of this series, as you'll see from today's webinar, is to engage practitioners and researchers on topics relevant to adult educators in California. Today's webinar will focus on the English language proficiency standards for adult education, and to lead us through our discussion today is Marianne Fideli-McLeod. She is and you might be very familiar with her already, but for those of you who are less familiar with her, Marianne is a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. She currently directs the Preparing Adult ELLs for Rigorous College and Career Readiness Standards Project for the U.S. Department of Education, and she is currently the Senior Advisor for CALPRO. She began her career in adult education in 1991, teaching English as a foreign language, and since then she served as a classroom instructor, program manager, and professional developer. And she's very familiar with these standards, and I know she'll do a great job of leading us through our discussion. So I'm going to now turn it over to Marianne.
Okay, hi everyone, and Jennifer and Marcella, can you hear me?
You're sounding great.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And hi everyone, it's good to see all of you, or at least see your names in the chat pods. A lot of familiar names and some folks who I don't know yet, and so I'm really pleased to be able to present at today's session and work with all of you to present these newly published standards. So I'll begin by giving us some background and also talking about a few upcoming events. Today's session will provide an introduction and overview to the standards, but we also have other sessions now planned to support understanding and use on a deeper level and a classroom level, which we recognize is really important. So whereas today it'll be introduction, overview, and an opportunity for you to ask questions and give inputs, we do have these upcoming sessions on February 14th, what teachers need to know about English language proficiency standards. And this would be relevant, this session on the 14th would be relevant to anyone who has adult ELLs in a classroom, whether that's an ESL classroom, an ABE classroom, an ASE classroom. On March 14th, we'll be offering Applying the English Language Proficiency Standards, and this will be focused on the ESL classroom instructor focus. And on May 24th, we'll have a session working with ELLs and CTE and other classes, which will have a CTE and I guess IET focus. And our colleague and friend Dave Coleman, who I believe is in this session, will be offering these three sessions. So in advance, thank you, Dave. And I will say to all of you, in preparing for these upcoming sessions, as well as other work that we may do around the standards, or to support use of the standards, your inputs and comments in the few chat pods we'll have open with specific questions will be enormously helpful in guiding us as to how we consider the future work around this. And so we really encourage you, and I encourage you to, when we have some questions, to provide whatever responses you can think of. So thanks in advance for that. And I guess with that note, we'll get to our first chat pod. Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. We'll just spend a minute on this. Again, this will to some degree help in today's session, and I think to a larger degree help in planning future sessions, particularly upcoming webinars. What do you already know about the ELP standards for adult education, English language proficiency standards for adult ed, and how are you currently using them? And thank you. I see some of you typing already. Okay, Susan Gare, good to see you. They're much more rigorous than the old standards. Yes, I think we would agree with that, and that was one of the main goals Octave had in their development. Mary Louise, there are 5 levels, right? There are 10 anchor standards and 5 performance levels in each standard. Let's see. Alisa, there is, you are in a probably very good company, not having had a lot of time to look them over yet. Jamie, always good to see you. They are scaffold to the CCRS for English language for ELs, English learners. I've been using them in training, especially 10 principles. Great. So you're going to be able to help us out. We'll be recruiting you soon, Jamie, to do some event, I am certain. Let's see. Using them to update, revise existing CORs for the core ESL class. I'm not sure what, Carla, what capital COR stands for. Maybe you could just write that in. I see you writing, so if you wouldn't mind. Just starting to learn, not much at all. It's fine. Yeah, Sylvia, I've read good to see you. I've read the document, but I'm not sure how they fit with CCRS and NRS levels. Looking forward to learning more. Absolutely. I'm going to say a word about each thing. And Dave, I think you answered Sylvia a bit. They do not supplant or take away from the CCRS. They are meant to support the CCRS, which stay in place. Yes, absolutely. That is how I believe Octave sees them. I think the term we use is they provide a language lift to the CCRS. And again, I'll discuss more of this. Gretchen, I know there are 10 standards and corresponded to the CCR standards, but I am unsure how the 5 levels relate to the NRS. And again, I'm going to say a brief word about that later. Okay. Course outline, and they are scaffolds to the CCRS. Oh, hi, Rana. Yes, Rana Meiji. They are scaffolds to the CCRS, using them in staff development. Great. Okay. And Amy, they're supposed to help move our students towards the CCRS, our ultimate objective. That's yes, I think that would be that view would be shared by the project team and Octave. So I think maybe with Amy Kibble's comment, let's go back to our presentation, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to say a few words about the background to Octave's decision to invest in this effort and kind of how we got from there to here. So nationally, ELLs currently make up more than 40% of the adult educations in the adult ed students in the federally funded system. More than 30% of all adult learners are at the lowest levels of literacy, and of these low literate learners, 61% are ELLs. So we have a system nationally, as well as in California, that largely has a very high percentage of English language learners. This data is from the most recently available NRS program year data, which is 13-14. Something else we know is that low literate learners are typically at the lowest socioeconomic levels. So a concern that informed the decision to invest in this effort is one of equity for adult English language learners in terms of how they're served through the system. This is from Haida Spruck Wrigley in a Octave publication. I include citations on these slides from where information comes from. You'll see the links are largely the publication that's already been put out. But you'll have access to the slides and therefore the links to the references. Research suggests that good jobs, that is jobs that pay family-sustaining wages, require at least some post-secondary education. And we all know that many ELLs come to the U.S. and to California with very valuable skills, but face the difficult task of acquiring English while simultaneously learning academic or career content and skills. The goals of WIOA are for ESL programs to support adult English language learners in building reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. And programs must also help ELLs obtain a high school diploma or its equivalent and support them as they move toward their education, training, and employment goals. So to achieve these outcomes, which are ambitious, that are in WIOA, ELLs must be college and career ready and must be able to meet rigorous college and career readiness standards. As I said before, these English language proficiency standards for adult ed, I think, can be seen as the language lift for adult ELLs in meeting the rigorous content of the college and career readiness standards. The ELP standards for AE emphasize the need for ESL programs to move beyond teaching life skills and to have a focus on college and career readiness and the sort of rigor of the CCRS. And I am going to be pausing at moments, and Marcella is going to help me out to look at the general chat pod in case there's some comments or questions that you have. So please feel free to write in the general chat pod as well. And I'll try to get to all of them or as many as possible. And if I don't have answers today, hopefully I'll have answers upcoming. So in terms of the OCTAE's motivation, OCTAE, U.S. Department of Ed, Office of Career, Technical and Adult Education, has been engaged in efforts to support standards-based education reform in adult education for many years. They recognize the demands of the college and career ready standards, and they know that it presents challenge for all students and unique challenges for English language learners. And so OCTAE, because of what's required of WIOA, because of the state of the field and the number of ELLs we serve and the desire to have equity in the quality and standard of education that ELLs receive, OCTAE has funded the Preparing Adult ELLs for Rigorous College and Career Ready Standards to assure equity and quality in what's offered to our ELLs. And I'm the project director for this effort. Marcella Movitz, our deputy PD, but I do want to acknowledge that there are many, many more people involved who are subject matter experts who identified the standards and who supported the creation of the standards, the descriptors, the correspondences, and the report. Some names I'm sure you're very familiar with: Betsy Parrish, Patsy Vinogradov, Jane Roy, Gary Cook, a team at the American Institutes for Research. So I do want to acknowledge the work of many people that was much greater than mine in getting to where we are right now in terms of the document. This is an overview just taken from an excerpt of the public detail of the project. The Preparing Adult ELLs project will develop products and services that support the development of educational programs that enable adult students to achieve competency in English language acquisition as well as rigorous academic content. This project is being conducted by the American Institutes for Research under contract with the U.S. Department of Education. And in terms of what we are doing on the project, these are our responsibility for producing over the course of 3 years, and we're through our first year and into our second year of this project. The first was the set of standards that correspond to the CCRS that was achieved in the production and publication of the report. A second main task that we're involved with right now is an outcome of this project will be a set of revised NRS educational functioning level descriptors for ESL. Sylvia and others who had that question, we are in the beginning phases of this work, so there are not hard and fast answers about the outcome of this effort, but I do want you to know that it is an intentional and planned part of the project and is being undertaken now, and we would imagine that over the course of the next several months, that we will have a draft set of NRS EFLs and level descriptors for public comment. We're also producing a set of virtual trainings to support use of the standards of instruction. And this is, of course, the federally funded project, not CALPRO, so that'll be something that's available, those products nationally. This is, in terms of the PD resources we're putting out, this is an excerpt from a post from our contract manager, Rana Spicone at OCTAE. I just thought it'd be worthwhile to show you what Octave is putting out with respect to what we're doing. So we're producing 3 professional development modules. They'll be self-guided online courses. We expect the first to be released sometime in the late spring of 2017, so in the next several months. The first module will be an introduction to the standards and correspondences, probably somewhere in the range of about an hour long course, just to provide an introduction and some engaging activities, or we hope engaging activities. And then module 2, we're going to examine how task analysis is used to help students understand the content knowledge, thinking skills, and language proficiencies they're expected to demonstrate. That'll come out in winter 2018, late winter. And then the third module will be a continuation of the task analysis process to understand the what, why, and how of using ELP standards for adult ed, and correspondences in planning and instruction. That will be summer or late summer 2018. And this effort is one that is just in the very beginning planning stages. So I'm offering it as a word about what's upcoming, and there really isn't any specific other detail to share. We go through a long process of developing these courses with Octave. Okay. And I'm just scanning the chat pod. Marcella, did you see any questions or comments that I should?
No, there haven't been any yet. Other than Patsy, now is Patsy Egan, no longer Vinogrado.
Thank you very much for that correction. And Marion Thatcher, thank you. Heidesbruck Wrigley will actually be doing the 3rd Instructors Forum webinar. Dave, don't worry, we don't have you on the hook for 3, apparently, just 2. And then our dear colleague, Heidesbruck Wrigley, will do the 3rd session, so I am corrected. I don't see any questions, so I'll go on and describe in brief the process of selecting the standards. So you can read these 3 bullets, and in short, rather than develop an original set of standards, the project team determined that the ELP standards for adult ed should be derived from an evidence-based, applicable, and widely accepted framework of K-12 ELP standards. In much the same way, it mirrored the process of the identification of the CCRS standards for adult ed, which is derivatives of the Common Core. So we followed largely the same methodology. The project team chose the ELPA 21 K-12 ELP standards as the starting point for the selection of the ELP standards for adult ed. The Council of Chief State School Officers, the Understanding Language Initiative at Stanford, and the states that are part of the ELPA 21 consortium worked with WestEd to develop the ELPA 21 standards. And the ELPA 21 standards, again, the reason for this selection: highlight and amplify the critical language knowledge about language and skills using language that are integrated into state-adopted academic content standards. They also underscore the interconnectivity between language and standards-driven content. This is a little fuzzy, but this graphic is available in the report, and I just wanted to kind of walk through and brief the process that the panel used. We used when we used. So to begin, our panelists, and that was Patsy Egan, Gary Cook, and Jane Roy as the first panel of folks we worked with on this project, independently reviewed and rated the ELPA 21 standards and their level descriptors for their relevance and importance to the adult ed context. That's number 1. Number 2, we held a face-to-face meeting at Octave with AIR staff, our panelists. I failed to mention initially, in terms of the acknowledgments, the role of DSF Consulting, which is a partner to AIR, so I want to acknowledge them. So Octave, AIR, DSF Consulting, and our panelists met in person to share the ratings and select the ELP standards for adult ed. We then conducted another independent review and finalization of the standards. So again, sort of independent review, collaborative panelist meeting, and then a secondary independent review. And then once the standards and performance levels were finalized, we identified correspondence with the college and career readiness standards for adult ed, including the math practices, as well as the next generation science standards, science and engineering practices. Okay, I don't see any, I think I see any questions. Yes.
Sorry, just a note. DSF Consulting now goes by Support TED.
Yes, Support
In case
Ed,
anybody's looking to find them or to Google them to get more information.
Yeah. Yeah, and their correct name is used in the report itself. Thank you so much, Marcella. So the guiding our work, or anchoring the work that we did are two pieces. Guiding principles that are a statement of shared belief among the project team and our panelists with respect to what we know and believe about adult learners and adult ESL instruction, and a set of design parameters, which I'll discuss next. But for right now, I want to focus on the guiding principles. So again, this is a statement of what we know, what is known, and what we believe about adult ELLs that really anchored us and centered us in the work as the process unfolded. So I'm going to just talk through these for just a moment, and then we're going to open up another chat pod, and we have a couple of questions for you. Adult ELLs have the potential to meet state-adopted challenging academic content standards, which where we offer a lot of training on the college and career readiness standards. Adult ELLs represent a diverse population of learners. Adult ELLs' funds of knowledge are a resource for their learning. Social language has an important role in ELL's English language acquisition process. The three key instructional advances form the basis of state-adopted content standards for English language arts in adult ed that ELLs must also access. And for those of you familiar with the CCRS, those three shifts in ELA are complexity, so regular practice with complex text and its academic language, evidence, reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from text, both literary and informational, and shift 3, knowledge, building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. On with the guiding principles, adult ELLs must be able to successfully engage with a wide variety of informational text. Scaffolding in instruction is an essential tool to facilitate ELLs' acquisition of language and content. ELLs with disabilities have specific instructional needs. Multimedia technology aligned to the ELP standards for AE should be integrated into instruction, and academic language instruction should be incorporated into all content lessons, including mathematics and science. So Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next layout, thank you so much. So we have two questions for you. Again, we are in the upcoming sessions that we're going to do on CalPro, we're going to have a focus on the guiding principles, and so I'm hoping that you can respond to these two questions in their chat pods. The first question, how do you see the learners that you work with reflected in these shared beliefs? And then what do these principles mean for instruction? Are there implications for instruction? So if you wouldn't mind just for a minute answering both question 1 and then 2. Sylvia writes, our learners come with such a wealth of knowledge and experience. We need to respect and use their wisdom in the classroom. I think we all likely agree, and I would say, Sylvia, the panelists and AIR and Octave would all agree with your statement. Rana, scaffolding instruction to make informational text accessible is key. Susan, our learners are so talented, these principles will help them learn to express their talents in English. Thank you. Thank you for these inputs. Okay, we have several more comments. Stephanie appreciates the social language part of the principles. Let's see. Austin, their life experiences and cultures provide a very valuable resource for enriching the classroom and other students' learning experiences. Absolutely. Beth writes, we need to reach our learners in a variety of teaching strategies and methods. And Dennis, you ask a clarifying question. I'm not sure what you mean by social language has an important role. Are you talking about social media or the use of English in less formal settings? The use of English in less formal settings, so non-academic content. Veda writes, the guiding principles are well-meaning. However, it's my hope that students will not be intimidated when they try to meet the state-approved standards. And I think there is, I would like to say, Veda, aside from agreeing with you, that the standards were put out in October. They are not mandated. And in terms of state approval, that would be a process that has not been undertaken yet. And in the meantime, I think towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a focus on the role of the instructor and the funds of knowledge you all have and instructors have in terms of making instructional decisions about learners. So I think in the interest of time, I do want to go on. Maybe I'll just say a couple of items from two, what do these principles mean for instruction? Sylvia writes, scaffolding language is highlighted, and it's important to add this into our understanding of advancing college and career readiness standards. Thank you. Jamie writes, integration of CCRS is supported. Digital literacy alongside with media, critical literacy has a place at the table. And yes, we are now science and math content validated. I've wanted that for years. Okay, great. Thank you, Jamie. And there are many comments. Teachers will need more PD to make it cohesive. Looks like a couple of nods to that comment, and so that's what we hope to provide through CalPro. And again, your inputs are really important to helping us get a handle on that. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to, in the interest of time, Steve, I do see you writing, but so we get through everything, Jennifer, can you please go to the main presentation? Thank you so much. And sorry if I cut anybody off. In the recording, you'll be able to review these comments that your colleagues have made. So the guiding principles were one side of our work being anchored in an understanding of ESL instruction and adult ELLs. The other anchoring or centering mechanism was the design parameters established for the creation of the standards. I will go through this very quickly, and I think, again, sort of get to maybe more of the heart of the presentation momentarily, but the selected standards don't define a national or federal mandate. They rather articulate a framework for states to employ voluntarily. The order of the standards doesn't represent the order in which they're to be taught or a hierarchy of importance. The standards do not specify how instructors should teach. The standards are not a curriculum. Standards do not specify the full spectrum of support and interventions appropriate for adult ELLs and all adult ELLs. Those adult ELLs with special needs and those with special needs. The standards do not offer an exhaustive list of what can be taught beyond the fundamentals specified within them. What, if any, content to add is purposely left to the discretion of instructors, curriculum developers, program admins, and states. So there is a lot of space, I would emphasize here, for the professional wisdom of the field in the implementation of the standards. And although the standards highlight the critical language knowledge about language and skills for using language that are crucial for adult ELLs to be successful in college and careers, they don't define the whole of such preparedness. So adults also depend on a variety of readiness skills and preparation, including habits of mind, stamina, persistence, punctuality, and time and workload management skills. And although the ELP standards for AA are integrated with the CCR standards, they're not meant to be used in place of state rigorous academic content standards. They're intended to be used to support adult learners in English language acquisition and participation in content area activities. And I do see comments. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and, Marcella, you will please let me know if you see a sort of trend in comments or something as you scan that you feel like I should address.
The only question that came up was when we were going to get to see the standards, and Sudhi shared the link, and I know that you're getting to that in just a moment.
Yeah, so anybody who, this session is post-dates the publication, which so they are publicly available and ready for you on the link that Sudhi shared. Thank you, Sudhi. Let's see. In terms of conceptualizing the 10 standards that we have, there's two organizing frameworks. The first, and this is a graphic right from the report, standards 1 through 7 describe the language necessary for ELLs to engage in content-specific practices associated with state-adopted academic content standards, and that's CCRS in many states. They begin with a focus on extraction of meaning, you'll see in Standard 1, and then progress to engagement in these practices. So again, though there isn't a hierarchy in the order of the standards, they're not meant to be taught in a sort of linear fashion necessarily. As you go through standards 1 through 7, which are about engaging in rigorous academic content, the skills, language skills needed to engage in rigorous academic content, you will see a sort of progression. So the first is construct meaning from oral presentations and literary and informational text through level appropriate listening, reading, and viewing. I'm not going to read through all of the first 7. And then ending with number 7, adapt language choices to purpose, task, and audience when speaking and writing. So those are the first 7 are, again, sort of geared towards language necessary for ELLs to engage in content-specific practices. And then standards 8 through 10 focus on micro-level linguistic features, such as determining meaning of words, using appropriate speech, conventions of language, grammar, etc. Again, we offer this because I think there's in a desire to provide some conceptual frameworks for seeing the standards, how they work together, and wrapping, as practitioners, wrapping our arms around them. And then a second conceptual framework for organizing the 10 standards is this one, and this graphic isn't in the report, but we have a paragraph, few sentences of narrative description, and so again, you won't see this graphic in there, but it's written about. So the ELP standards for adult ed focus on all 4 domains of language acquisition: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. ELP standards 1 and 8 focus on receptive skills, listening and reading. The focus of standards 3, 4, and 7 is on productive skills, just speaking and writing. And ELP standards 2, 5, and 6 are interactive in that they require a collaborative use of both receptive and productive skills. And ELP standards 9 and 10 focus on linguistic structures of English language, of English. And I don't see any questions, so again, these 2 graphics and organizing frameworks are offered as a mechanism for wrapping your arms around the standards as a whole as you consider applying them and using them. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to, Marcella, rely on you to scan for questions. The level 1 through 5, so each of our 10 standards are accompanied by 5 proficiency levels, the level 1 through 5 descriptors, and they specify the more granular targets for ELL performance that should be achieved by the end of each ELP standard level. Excuse me. The descriptors are designed to capture the process that occurs as adult ELLs acquire English. They provide examples of how students at all levels can work on language knowledge and skill appropriate for their level as they work to master each standard. The descriptors are, we think, keys to supporting ELL's language development in relation to the standard, in so much as they are more granular and they support, again, provide that focus of for instruction. And Susan, Susan Garrett's pointing out a typo. I'm not sure if it's mine or yours. Oh, it's yours. Okay. Yes, I like the chart too, although we have a chance to download the presentation. I believe so. Jennifer, will this presentation be downloadable?
We are going to be able to send it to attendees after the webinar is over, and then of course the webinar recording will be available on the website as well.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much.
And Marianne, we have a question from Sylvia. Are the 5 proficiency levels the same as level 1 through 5 descriptors?
Yes. Sorry, I'm using a number of different terms, but right, each of the 10 standards has 5 proficiency levels, and those are the number 1 through 5 descriptors. So I'm sorry that that's confusing. I will consider that for future presentations. Just to say another word about the descriptors. The descriptors detail what student performance targets in each specific standard will look like in practice at each level, as demonstrated by learners. They give examples of how students at all proficiency levels can work on language knowledge and skill appropriate for their level as they work to master each standard. Okay, I'm going to go, and I know I'm going through a lot of sort of big concepts kind of quickly. There's a lot in the report, and again, more that CalPro is going to do to aid in understanding. Rana, you ask, are the 5 levels in the ELP the same as in the CCRS? No, there is, right, as you rightly note, the CCRS has 5 proficiency levels associated with each standard, but they're not aligned. Correspondences, and that's a nice bridge, Rana, to this short part of the presentation. In general, correspondences are comparisons between non-equivalent artifacts that help educators to understand the relationship between sets of standards. These comparisons do not result in full alignment. And of course, the correspondence we're concerned with is with the college and career readiness standards, the correspondence we provide, as well as the next generation science standards. So, for example, the comparison between the ELP standards for adult ed and the CCR standards for mathematical practice result in correspondence rather than alignment. This is because not all of the knowledge and skills identified in the ELP standards for AE are found in the mathematical practices. The ELP standards for adult ed and the CCR English Language Arts and Literacy standards are more similar, but also these 2 sets of standards do not focus on the exact same skills and knowledge, which is why we use the term correspond, which is what makes them correspondences and why we use that term. Alignment is a comparison of like or equivalent artifacts, and so, for example, tests designed to measure the standards would seek full alignment. And there's more written in the report with respect to what's meant exactly by correspondences.
Marianne, you had a couple of questions. One asks, are we going to say levels 1 through 3 is A, 4 is B, 5 is C, A through C being CCRS?
Oh, gosh, Jamie, are we going to say levels? No, I don't think we would say something like that for purposes of the project. I think the correspondence, and when we get to view 1 and 2, it might be a little bit easier to see what we've done.
And then, Marianne, we had one more question. It's very specific, and you might talk about it in a moment. I think you'll address this, but why isn't CCR Standard 9 included in an ELP 1 reading?
Oh gosh, that would. I will tell you, those of you who have been involved in processes like this, know the sort of depth and intensity of conversation, and so I honestly can't. I don't think I would do a service if I tried to reproduce, mostly because I wouldn't be able to recall it accurately. But there was a needing an independent work to determine the correspondence, and I will rely on the work of our panelists, and feel pretty confident that they did a good job. Marcella, do you
mind if I speak to that?
Your microphone.
I'm sorry, I was just hoping to speak to that for a second, if that's okay.
Go for it, by all means.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
So I believe in the report we say that these are just some of the correspondences. As you go through, you may find some more. And so in this case, Lori, that might be what's going on there. Sorry, so I'll mute myself now.
Thanks, Marcella. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. For some reason, when your mic's on, it at least for me, causes a echo effect. But and right, Marcella is and it is found some on one of those pages presenting the correspondences. We would think that as you all dig deeper, there might be additional correspondences that you find. And I'm going to go on. Oops. Oh, I'll stay there for a second. So in terms of the correspondences in the report, we present the standards with corresponding content to ELA, the math practices, and the next generation science standards. In terms of the CCRS, English Language Arts and Literacy, the correspondences display the relationship between the content and language demands associated with the CCR standards for ELA and literacy. And this set of correspondences may be especially useful to you because the two sets of standards share that a similar framework based on skills in reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language. In terms of correspondence to the mathematical practices of the CCRS, these correspondences display the relationship between the content and language demands associated with the CCR standards for math practice and the ELP standards for AE. Those of you familiar with the CCR mathematical practices, they describe the habits of mind that mathematics educators should foster in their students, and that's from the CCRS report, Pimentel 2013. Correspondence with the next generation science standards, the science and engineering practices. These correspondences display the relationship between the content and language demands of the NGSS science and engineering practices and the ELP standards for AE. The NGSS science and engineering practices describe behaviors that scientists and engineers engage in and support students' understanding of the links between science and engineering and how scientific knowledge develops. Again, all of this is described in much greater detail in the report. And for those of you, I'm sure those of you who've gone into the report have seen this, and it's really might be a little hard, whatever kind of screen. If you're working on a small screen right now, this would be very hard to see. But we offer the correspondences in two views. View 1 supports use of the ELP standards for providing instruction in English language acquisition as a roadmap to acquiring the academic content of the CCRS. It highlights the relationship between the ELP standards and the language demands found in the CCRS, as well as the math and science practices. This view of the standards may be most useful when the main focus of instruction is English language acquisition. And so we imagine that you'll let us know in the future that ESL instructors may want to start by using View 1. And again, it sort of leads with the ELP standard, the top left, followed to the right of it by its 5 level descriptors. Just below the descriptors are the correspondence to the mathematical practices, and next to that the correspondence to the science and engineering practices, and then finally the correspondence to the CCR English Language Arts and Literacy standards for adult ed. And how do the, Myra, I'm scanning for a couple of questions. How do the levels, Myra writes, how do the levels correspond to the ESL course levels? I'm not sure how to answer that question, Myra. I'm not specifically familiar with what you mean by ESL course levels. So please, maybe if you want to write a little bit more, and maybe our colleagues have a better answer that I can provide. So I encourage you to write more. Can you explain, Carla writes, can you explain the level ECCRS? You know what, Carla, I will do that on the very next slide. Susan Gare writes, Myra, are you describing the old model standards? Okay. I will leave it to you, Susan and Myra, to engage with each other here, and I'll tune back in just a moment. But for now, I'm going to go on to View 2. And this actually, I think, to some degree will answer that question about level E. So View 2 of the standards, because as you all know, many adult ELLs are enrolled in ABE and ASE and CTE programs. So this view is structured to bring academic content of the CCRS to the forefront. And it can be used to ensure that if the focus of instruction is on CCRS standards-based academic content, that you can also attend to the language acquisition needs of learners enrolled in those academic content, ABE, ASE, CTE, IET courses. It displays each CCRS standard for English Language Arts and Literacy, the anchor standard, that corresponds to one or more of the ELP standards for AE. Each CCR standard is presented along with its level E descriptors. The panel that we worked with, Jane, Patsy, and Gary, recommended this presentation because level E is the target or the end goal in the CCR standards for adult ed, and level E subsumes the levels preceding it, and it represents the standard's highest level of rigor. So I forget now who asked that question, but that's why there's level E of the CCR anchor standard is called out. In View 2 of the CCR standards, in View 2, the CCR standards run across the top, as you'll see. And below that is the level E descriptor, performance level and descriptor for that standard. And then it's followed by the ELP standard and its level descriptors. And Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind, thank you so much. Oh gosh, we have 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you over the next minute or so to please respond to this question. And again, correspondences will be a focus of one of the upcoming sessions we do, so I'm hoping that you wouldn't mind taking a moment to respond here to the question, how can you use the correspondences to support collaboration with your colleagues who teach ABE, ASE, or CTE courses to improve instruction for ELLs in your program?
And Marianne, I just quickly wanted to mention you have a few questions in the chat pod as well.
Yes. I'm gonna, while folks are writing, I will scan and do my best to see what I can get to. Okay. Carla, you write, does anyone know when those new standards are expected to be released? These standards are released, so they are publicly available. Sylvia, you're right. I really like View 1 because it encourages how you can address multiple CCR standards in integrated skills courses. Yes, that would be a very a valuable use.
Carla clarified that she meant the NRS standards.
Oh, okay. Let me see here. And I'm sorry, Marcel. Okay, Carla wrote NRS. Oh, the NRS descriptors, Carla. In the coming, I would say, several months. I know that doesn't. It's probably not as specific as you might have hoped.
And Lori asked if level 1 was pre-level A CCRS.
I'm sorry. I want to see the question, so that one is asked by Lori. Level 1 seems to be pre-level A CCRS. I can't. I don't think I could provide an answer to that, Lori. And I think some of questions like that will be answered over time. So I don't want to do a disservice by providing a response that I don't think would be necessarily true or accurate at this point. So I apologize for things that I want to be upfront about what I feel like I can't answer. Okay.
Marianne, are you able to speak to whether or not the ELP levels span the same range of ability as the CCRS?
I don't feel like I could speak to that. I mean, they are separate standards that correspond to each other, but, the nature of the correspondence as we describe, and I would ask you to look at the report, is sort of not a one-to-one totality of each. So there are knowledge and skills that are found in the ELP standard and the corresponding CCR standard, but we really specifically wouldn't and didn't and couldn't go for that level of alignment. Gretchen writes, you have said that the ELP standards do not replace existing adult ed standards. However, CA does not have official standards for ESL. So we just go back to the old model standards. This is why so many are asking what level 1 and 5 correlate with for adult ESL levels. And I feel like, again, Gretchen, I might not do I hope I provide a somewhat satisfactory response, in so much as this is a federally funded project and the standards are available. They are put out and can voluntarily be adopted by states, but there's no mandate around them, and it will be up to states to make decisions about the use of the standards and what's required. And so there isn't an octave position on what has to be done, and as well at this point there isn't a CDE position on adoption of the standards. That would be a policy decision that I just can't respond to, and so I hope that this gets to some degree to your question. And I am running out of time, and not going to be able, I think, to respond to everything. So I apologize in advance, but now ask Jennifer for you to go ahead back to the presentation. Thank you so much. And again, I think for any one of the things, I recognize that we have 1 hour today, and for each one of the main components, the guiding principles, the design parameters, the anchor standards, their performance level, 5 performance level descriptors, the correspondences, we could do very long intensive professional development. So I recognize that I'm covering a lot of ground quickly. And what we are going to do is your comments today will be very helpful in helping us think about what else and what more we need to do. So though I'm not able to answer everything, I do continue to encourage you to write if you don't mind, even if I am not able to answer it. So finally, in terms of elements of the report, there's a few supports for instructors and educators found, and that's a glossary of terms, vignettes or sort of examples in practice, and sampled scaffolds and supports. So there's a few what I refer to as vignettes or classroom scenarios. I believe there's 4 in the report, and you'll find them. They're called what it looks like in practice scenarios. These are intended to provide practical examples of how the ELP standards for adult ed and their correspondences might be used to inform instruction. We relied on our panelists to write these from their sort of instructional background. And we really look forward to more examples emerging from practice. So I would, for any of you out there who are engaged in the productive struggle around understanding and using these, if you have additional examples of what it looks like in practice that you'd be willing to share, that would be something that I think would help everybody, and we would, via CalPro, potentially be able to share in the future. So I guess that's a plug for you all to get back in touch with us with what you produce. Next, we provide some examples of scaffolds and supports, and of course scaffolds in this case are temporary guidance or assistance that teachers can provide to a student so that they can perform a task which they wouldn't be able to perform alone. And that's from the National Governors Association for Best Practices, 2010. The goal of scaffolding is for students to eventually perform the task independently and not require the scaffold. For adult ELLs, the amount and type of scaffolding they may need really depends on each student's level of English language proficiency, as well as other background variables such as levels of literacy and native language. And this really requires you as instructors and educators to make professional judgments based on your knowledge of individual students about the types of scaffolds and supports they'll need. The standards themselves we deliberately avoided making specific recommendations for scaffolds within the text of the standard itself so as not to appear prescriptive. So this table appears as an appendix, table C1. The recommended supports and scaffolds are provided for adult ELLs at proficiency levels 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 5, based on the level descriptors. And some supports and scaffolds, such as wait time and building background, may be appropriate for more than one level. And this list is very much not exhaustive. Oh, geez, it's 2 o'clock. But Jennifer, for those hanging on the line, I hope that you can go ahead and go to our next chat pod. And I appreciate everybody who's staying on now. I think we're going to go over by a few minutes. And I'm going to ask if you would to respond to this final question we have, again, in the interest of informing us and your colleagues about what more we can do and your ideas. So what scaffolds and supports do you think would be necessary and effective with your students? So I know you have more different levels of familiarity with the standards, but based on what you know of the standards, the rigor they demand, and what you know of the CCRS, and what you know of your learners, and again, since this isn't an exhaustive list, what examples do you have of a scaffold or support that you think would work? And I'm just going backwards from the bottom of the general chat pod. We really appreciate the last 2 slides. Yeah, we thought it was Great, Leah. We thought it was important, and Octay thought it was important to include those types of supports. Sylvia writes, I think we have to stay open to what this is, keeping language prominent in ELL instruction. We needed this when we originally saw the CCR standards. I think we need to have ongoing discussions about how to make ELP standards useful. I personally wholeheartedly agree with you on that this will be sort of an ongoing effort, and the professional wisdom around implementation and use will be really important. The scaffolds and support chart is helpful. And some examples are sentences. Dave Coleman writes, in the examples of scaffold sentence frames, which help students use academic language. Susan Gare writes, scaffolding is necessary for everything you do with low beginning students, teaching them how to organize. American style, use highlighters, take one-word notes. Jamie, I do, we do, y'all do. Okay? And Jamie and many of you, I'm sure I'm going to be getting in touch soon as we sort of get through this in CalPro and discuss the types of additional supports we should provide. Gretchen writes, always provide models of what we expect students to say or write before asking them to practice. Lori writes, advice on how to correlate CCRS levels, NRS levels, and ELP levels. And I see what you're saying, Lori. Again, the correspondences for the CCRS and ELP will be, that's what's published now, and additional guidance will be coming out with respect to the NRS. Carla writes, use of L1 with lower level to bridge the gap. Okay. Vita writes, wait time, repeating and paraphrasing always works. Pam writes, I like this graph and we'll make copies for each classroom. Fantastic. And I am scanning. This Mary Louise writes, this is important for those who have ELLs and ABE classes and for new teachers. We hope it has that kind of utility and beyond. And Thaibi, I hope I pronounced that right, strategies to move from life skills to academics. Okay, thank you everyone. Again, I know that I moved through a lot quickly, and that's in part because this is introductory and much of the information is in the report. And also we do have those additional sessions planned, and we hope that you will attend them and be just as vigorous in your comments and suggestions, because that really does help us on CalPro prepare to meet needs through our PD on this. So I very much appreciate it. Even though I probably stumbled through a couple of your questions, I do want you to know we hold these sessions so that we do have a vigorous conversation. And finally, thank you. That's the end of this. I appreciate a lot of you hanging in there. Past our time, 5 minutes past our time. This is my email address. Please feel free to get in touch with me and others at CalPro. And Jennifer, do you have a couple of housekeeping tips around evals and certificates?
Yes, thank you, Marianne. And if we all want to give Marianne some wonderful, well-deserved applause, this was a lot of information to cover. So if you would like a certificate for this, for attending this webinar, if you could please email me at jaldridge@air.org. And then also, if you would, the evaluation form will pop up when I close the webinar. But if you drop out before then, you can follow the evaluation web link on the right side of your screen and click on that. And we appreciate your comments and feedback on this webinar series and all of our other webinar series as well. I'm going to close out in just 1 minute, and I will be sending the presentation along to everyone who attended today, as well as the webinar recording will be available within by the end of this week on our website as well. So thank you all very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.